physics of faith. The physics of faith. It's an interesting concept. What does that look like? When I first was thinking this through, I was thinking, often we wonder why things are the way they are, but sometimes we also wonder about how. How is it that things work out that way? And how is it that the world works? And how does faith work? And why has God designed it the way that He has? And I have a bit of a fascination with that sort of thing, and I always liked physics and studying physics, and then I noticed there's even the Netflix has come out with a series on the unexplained files, because we like to know what's behind things. Like, we know why is it the way it is, and how is it the things work that way. Now, I'm not a scientist, but science and physics, I know enough to know it can be pretty complex. It can get really deep at times, but so can theology and the study of God. Studying God can also be deep and sometimes hard to understand and get a grasp on. And I think maybe God designed it in our world that way to reflect who He is too. It says in 1 Corinthians, Paul, as he was thinking this through, he says in chapter 8, verse 2, those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know. In other words, we don't know everything, and we can't know everything, and so let's just humbly admit that up front. There's a lot of stuff in our world that we don't understand. When I was a teenager, I thought I knew everything. And the more I learned, the more I realized I didn't know. And I think we all go through that journey, right? We realize and we go along, there's so much that we don't know and so many answers we can't give to people. And so let's approach this with a little bit of humility also. Malcolm Gladwell said the same thing in his famous book called Blink. He said, we're a bit too quick to come up with explanations for things that we don't really have an explanation for. We need to accept our ignorance and say, I don't know, more often. Isn't that true? We probably, it is a good habit, a good thing to say, you know, I'm just not sure if I have the answer on that one. Because there's so many things we don't understand about ourselves even. We ought to know ourselves, and yet there are things we don't even know why we do what we do. You know, as I was thinking about this message too, if I was doing this 100 years ago, a message relating faith and physics, and the world was based on Newtonian physics, which has completely changed in the last 100 years, I mean, this sermon would have been really out of date. And so I think, oh, okay, well then what's going to happen in the next 100 years? I mean, something like this has a bit of a shelf life because physics changes and we learn so much, and the world is different because of what we've learned. And so for that reason too, I have to come to this topic with somewhat sense of humility, because we don't know the answers and things change as we discover more and more about our world and about our God who created everything. Imagine for a moment with me that if you were born with one eye. Let me ask you a question. Do you think this was photoshopped, or do you think this is an actual person? Anyone think this is a real person? No. Okay, yeah, you're right, Ben. This is a smart group. Okay, so but here's the thing. If you close an eye, why don't you close an eye right now? So you've got one eye, and you've probably done this before, and then bring your two fingers together in front of you and try to connect them. And you lose depth perception, don't you? Most of you missed when you try to touch fingers, because two eyes help us to gain a sense of depth, right? We understand, we lose the ability to judge distance with one eye. Two, it helps us to see better. When I was younger, I thought, well, I have two, so if I blind myself in one eye doing something, I still got another one. But no, there's more to it than that. We really need it for depth perception. It really helps us to see things better. So here's what I'm thinking about faith and physics, that that science and faith go hand in hand. We see the world better when we view both of them. This is what Albert Einstein said. He said, science without religion is lame. Conversely, religion without science is blind. Too many people believe that science and faith are in conflict with each other, and believe that to be a scientist you can't be a Christian, or vice versa. And the truth is, we need both. In fact, some of the greatest scientists were Christians. And Albert Einstein, unquestionably a rather smart guy, believed we need both. Let me put it to you another way. I have a chart that I put together. And on an IQ and SQ, we'll say a spiritual quotient. So on the bottom, we've got a high and low intelligence scale. And if you were to go low to high on the spiritual scale, where would you fit? Which box would you be in? Well, most of you would not put yourself in the low smart, not smart, not spiritual box, right? Although you probably know somebody that might fit in that box, right? And then there's the high. If you go along the bottom, and it'd be your bottom left or bottom right. Some very smart people, but they're not very spiritual, right? They really want nothing to do with faith, and yet they're very smart, right? And those are the people that think spirituality doesn't matter. In fact, they probably would put you in the quadrant in the top left-hand corner box, which is very spiritual, not very smart. Because most people who go to church are spiritual, and they're not very smart. At least that's the assumption in the world, because they wouldn't believe what they believe if they were Christians. And so they make these assumptions. But the truth is, we're trying to go to the top right corner, right? That's what we aspire to be. Both smart, we want to understand things, but we also want to be spiritual. And they can go together. They do work together. In Mark chapter 12, in verse 30, it says that, what would you like me to do? Oh, sorry, yeah. That's my fault. I was wondering why the sound isn't very good. And that's because I hid my mic. That's better. Now you can hear me. So, start over. Smart? Yeah. Somebody is not smart. I guess I'm in the lower left quadrant. Of all Sundays to make that mistake. Okay, yeah, now good laugh at me. Okay, Mark chapter 12. Let's move on quickly here. Okay, Mark 12. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. As you think about that, there are 4 different ways that we can love the Lord. In fact, we're exhorted to love Him. This is one of the great commandments, to love the Lord your God with more than just your mind, more than just your strength, but also your spirit and your soul, with your heart. There's different ways. And if we only love God one way, we're missing the other 3/4 of the way of loving God. It's like our brain. We have 2 sides to our brain, a left and a right. And the left is more the rational thinking, and the right is more the creative thinking side. If we love our God with only one half of our brain, we're missing part of the way that we can worship and love God. It takes both. And as we learn more about the brain, we realize that that's a really oversimplification of the brain, and our thinking patterns actually have more to do with the pathways that go between both quadrants. And we realize, wow, we have a pretty amazing God. And that enables us to love Him all the more. In fact, the more we learn about Him, the more we love Him. Jesus picked up on this in John. He was speaking to a woman at a well once. He made an interesting comment. He said, "You Samaritans know so little about the one you worship. Where we Jews, we worship what we do know." And what he's saying here is when you know more about the true God, you can worship Him better because of what you know. It's the idea that the more you learn, the more you see. The more you know about God, the better you're able to worship Him. I recently pruned an apple tree behind my house, and I didn't have a clue how to do it. So like many of you, when you don't know how to do something, you go to YouTube, you watch a video about how to do it, and then you walk back out, and then you practice doing what you just learned. And it's funny how I looked at the tree so differently after I watched the video. Before I looked at it, it says, I wouldn't have a clue to what to cut off. I watched the video, and it's like, oh, okay. Now I know this is a branch that should come off, and this one here would be blocking this one here, and at least let light in, and this one looks like one that's starting to die, and there's all these reasons why you would clip and which ones you would clip. And I didn't have a clue before. But you see things different once you've learned and once you've added knowledge. Well, the same with God. The more you know about Him, the better understanding and the better you're able to worship Him. And that's what Jesus is saying here. That when we learn more about God, we're able to interact with Him better, to love Him better, and to worship Him more. That's why I love the stars, to see the handiwork and creative side of God. Interesting, universities, most of the old universities were started by Christians, because Christians understood that we need an education, and learning is good. The more we learn about our world, the better we know and are able to worship God. And that's what Paul says in Romans chapter 1, verse 20. He says this, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and His divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." In other words, when we see what way things have been made, we learn about God. When we study the sciences, we see and gain a better understanding of the one who created it all. Pretty basic sounding, and that's why David says this in Psalm 139, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." He looks at his hands, he looks at his body. He didn't understand everything, but he could see enough in himself and those around him to say, wow, that's amazing how the finger and the thumbs work together, and how my legs work to carry me around. This is amazing. How did this happen? And so as he looked into the biology of it, the science area, he walks away and he's able to worship God more, just because he sees more of what God has done. During the pandemic, I remember watching a video about immunology, and just being blown away at how the cells and how our bodies work to fight off disease and to fight off vaccines were added to help boost the immune system in our bodies, and just the way it all worked together was like, wow, immunology is amazing, and it's all God designed it. And as we watch stuff like this, we just walk away thinking, oh, this is no simple creative act that God did. God is amazing in what He's created. And even with all our faults and all the things we look at, sometimes we start looking at all the things we wish God had changed about us, instead of stepping back and saying, wow, look at what you've done. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. So this has kind of been my introduction to the whole thing, and there's a few things I'd like to summarize right off the bat. So here's 4 things that I've said. Let's approach this with humility, because we don't have all the answers. A second thing I've said is that science and faith are better together. We see life better when we look at both of them together. Learning is a Christian thing. God wants us to learn and to grow and to study nature, study the sciences, so we see how things work, because ultimately that just reflects back on the Creator, the one who made us. Science has helps us then to worship our Creator. So here's some of those interesting things I just wanted to say right up front before we get into the first principle. And the first principle that I wanted to use that is a foundational principle in the area of physics. I don't really understand it all the way, but here it is. Some of you probably will. Heisenberg, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You don't have to understand it all, but this is what Heisenberg came up with. He says, there is a fundamental limitation to just how precisely we can know both the position and the momentum of a particle at a given time. You say, wow, who cares, right? But this, what you have to understand, when scientists are studying the anatomy of cells and even beyond protons and atoms and how things work, this is one of the fundamental principles. In fact, this guy, Heisenberg, won a Nobel Prize back in 1932 for this discovery. There was a big debate, and it's still debated. We still don't know, is light a wave or a particle? Is it based? And scientists are still arguing that, even to this day. But Heisenberg introduced it that, we don't know. There's uncertainty in a particle, where it will be. Does it move like a wave, or does it go? And we can't predict that, and we can't know that. And he says, so the very basic building block of our society and our world and everything we know, there's a degree of uncertainty about it. And that's true of the God who created it too. And we love that about God, and we hate that about God. Isn't that true? There are things about God we wish that were more predictable. And that we wish we could kind of put God in a box, and we know God's always going to act this way. And yet life happens. And there's a lot of unpredictable things that happen in life that we didn't foresee. And life is very uncertain. And in the midst of that, we turn to a God and we realize that, God created an uncertain world because God himself can't be put in a box. And there's uncertainty grows around him, about him. And like I say, we love that and we hate that. When it comes to a movie, we don't want to figure out, if there's a twist at the end, it makes the movie better, right? If we can predict what's going to happen and we know what's coming, it's like, okay, seen this, I know. And it's like boring. But when there's an interesting twist, when something happens at the end, it's like, wow, that's cool. Isn't it true that we like that uncertainty? And yet when it comes to our lives, we love it in other people's lives. When it comes to our lives, that's a little harder to take, isn't it? I remember riding, I used to like to ride roller coasters when the kids were high school. We took them on all different rides. And I remember once visiting, it was actually in Disney, and we went to this, and it wasn't a very big drop, but it was in the dark, right? And when you don't know what's coming, like a 3-foot drop feels like a 100-foot drop. Because both ways it can be a thrill because it was unexpected. And when life throws those unexpected turns, it's like, oh, that's the part of the thrill of living. And that uncertainty makes life interesting. And yet, it's also scary. Now let's take that to Scripture. I want to introduce you to faith. One of the best definitions of faith is in Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is confidence. Faith is confidence in what we hope for. What do you mean? We hope for? How can you have confidence in something that's future that we don't even know we have? He goes on and says, and assurance. And faith is also assurance about what we do not see. Well, how can you have assurance about something if you can't see it? How do you know God's there if you can't see him? He says, faith. Faith is confidence. It's an assurance about something that we can't see and that we hope for, which is an interesting dynamic. And it's a big dynamic for God. Like the Heisenberg principle is a big principle of physics, faith is a huge principle when it comes to walking with God. He wants us to live with confidence in an uncertain world. When there's lots of uncertainty, he's given us like a gift of faith. Faith is something that creates a confidence and assurance even in an uncertain times, even when we can't see what's ahead, even when we don't know what life is going to throw at us next. We can live by faith and have a confidence. You understand what faith is? It gives us confidence in an uncertain world. Now let's think about it this way. Is God predictable? And I think most of us are saying, no, God, He's not predictable. I mean, there's certain things about Him, but God's not predictable. And in fact, we don't really want God to be predictable. That would be too bland, too monochrome. We want God in full color. In fact, the mystery of learning about God is somewhat fascinating. It says, just a few verses later, there's a whole bunch of descriptions of this in chapter 11 of Hebrews, but in verse 8, to give you one of those, by faith it says, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, he obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. So he did not know what was in the future. He didn't know God was taking him from the Ur of the Chaldees in the Middle East to the land of Canaan, or today Israel. He didn't understand that. He just obeyed and went because God said to go. He had his dreams and plans, but walking with God sometimes brings in an element of uncertainty. And yet, that uncertainty, that faith in God, was also gave him confidence that, hey, God knows, so I'm okay, even when I don't know where I'm going. You see, faith gives us that certainty even when life around us is uncertain. A couple of weeks ago, Palm Sunday, it was the week before that, I talked about Luke chapter 9. And I read this verse. As they were walking along the road, a man said to Jesus, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus replied, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Think about that. I don't know where I'm even going to put my head down tonight. That's uncertainty. I don't know where I'm sleeping. You sure you want to follow? What Jesus is saying here is that following Christ means anything can happen. All bets are off. Right? We don't know what's up sometimes. And for some people, that's scary. And for others, that's exciting. And you know what I've found? A lot of that depends on your age. Not always. Your wiring and the way you're wired up too. But some people love that exhilaration that comes from like, oh yeah, I don't know what's next. But God, I'm going to trust you because I know you have your best for me. And I know you deliver on your promises. So I'll follow you even when I don't understand what I'm going through. That's living by faith. There's another, in Philippians 4, verse 6, it says, in the next, do not be anxious. Do not be anxious about anything. Really? Can anyone really do that? He goes on to say, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. So you've got some anxiety, you've got some worries, present those to God. You scared? Present that to God. And He'll give you a gift. The next verse says, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding. You can't figure it out. But when you live by faith, when you turn your anxieties and your stresses over to Him, and choose to follow Him, to trust in Him, as we sang, like, He will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Last week we sang a song too. We hadn't sung for a long time. As I was singing the song "Because He Lives," I was like, "Oh man, I haven't sung that in years." And then there's this line that just sort of rung my bell that day. It says, "I can face uncertain days because He lives." Isn't that true? Despite the uncertainty, there is a strength that comes when we trust and we put our faith in God. It helps us to live with that uncertainty. In fact, some people really thrive on it. I've done quite a few weddings over my years, and brides and grooms, when they get together and they meet and we plan it, they plan all the details out. They want to get everything nailed down perfect. But when they look back 10 or 20 years back at their wedding, You know what they remember? They remember the things that went wrong, and they laugh at them. And those spontaneous, funny moments are the things that brought life and color to a wedding. Even though they had everything planned out, they wanted everything to go perfect, but it's sometimes those unexpected things that bring color, make it memorable. Life is uncertain, and there will be uncertainty. Jesus said that too in John chapter 3. He said, the wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sounds, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it's going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. Are you a Christian? The Bible, that was Jesus' way to be born of the Spirit. Well then, if that's true, then stuff's going to happen that you don't understand. Like the wind, which you don't know where it's blowing or which way it's going. I was out flying kites last week with my grandkids, and it was one of those days where there was lots of wind and then no wind, and then it was close to the house, so it was swirling around the house. And so flying the kite, it would go up and down and spin around. It was hard to keep up in the air, and because sometimes it just goes up and just sits up there. And this time it didn't. But that made it kind of almost more exciting when there are variations in the wind, because the grandkids had to help get it back up in the air, and we're working hard to keep it up. And I'm thinking, okay, so sometimes life is just more interesting when there are those ups and downs. And Jesus points out that life is that way. There will be unexpected things. You can't tell what's coming. Now some of you will say, yeah, but doesn't the Bible say Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever? Right, yeah, he does. It does say that in Hebrews 13:8. But when I look at that verse in the context, I believe it's speaking mostly about Jesus' character. That he's honest, that he's forgiving, that he's loving, that he's kind, you can count on him, he's faithful. It doesn't talk about the way the world works and the way God works in the world. In fact, the Pharisees tried to put Jesus in a box and tried to make him fit in with their rules and regulations, and Jesus would drive them nuts because he'd do a twist on Scripture or teach things in a different way, and they just couldn't control him. He was unpredictable. And yet, he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. I want to close with these last verses last verses I want to look at from Ecclesiastes chapter 11. It says, and Solomon was writing these words. He was known as a very wise man, and he said, "Ship your grain across the sea, and after many days you will receive a return." Some of the older versions will say, "Cast your bread upon the water, and it will return to you in due time." You've heard the verse before. The idea is, when you throw things out, sometimes they'll come back, right? There's a time to be cautious, and then there's times to throw caution to the wind. There's times to be generous, right? Because when you're generous to other people, then sometimes generosity will come back to you. We're not sure if the translators had trouble with this verse, really trying to understand, was this an idiom of the day, a saying of the day, or something? But they translated in the New International Version this way, to ship your grain across the water, because you might get a return someday. But the idea is there's a degree of uncertainty in the return. He goes on to say in verse 4, "Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap." We're waiting for perfect situation. It's not going to happen. There's an element of risk in faith and in following God. It goes on in the next verse, says, "As you do not know the path of the wind," there's that analogy again, "or do not know how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things." We learn more all the time, and we're mystified and blown away at the science of a human birth and the way the climates and the weather works, but we can't predict it. And it changes, and there's uncertainty all the time and all around us. but there's someone behind it, right? The one who made it. It's a work of God, the maker of all things. Mark Burnett, he's a movie producer in Hollywood. He's done the shows like the Survivor Series and Shark Tank and The Voice and different shows like that. He wrote a book. He calls it just Jump In. And in the book, he talks about his own personal life of when he came over to L.A., landed in L.A. from the UK, and he had $600 in his pocket. That's it, and a dream. His first job was as a nanny in L.A. He started a business, and it failed. But he was making contacts, and that's what he was trying to do. And he finally got on with MGM and ended up becoming a big movie and show producer. But he says one of the biggest lessons he learned in life is you can't know the future. In fact, he says at best 50% of my decisions I had any degree of certainty. Most of them were just high risk. And I was hoping that it would work out. Because life is uncertain. In fact, let me just summarize some of the things that we've talked about this morning. Life is uncertain. God is not predictable. His character is, but many of his ways are not. But he's given us two gifts. He's given us faith that gives us confidence in difficult times, and he's given us peace. Peace that brings calm in the midst of uncertainty. Supernatural peace that he offers to us in uncertain times. Faith involves a risk because we don't know what's ahead. When Abraham headed out, he didn't know what the future held. There's risk involved when we throw caution to the wind. But I believe that God would want us to love the adventure. And in the midst of, he doesn't take away the uncertainty, but he wants us to learn to love the adventure and live with that. I want to show you a final picture. A charging rhino. And to the right of that picture, you'll see some lists. Let me ask you some questions, okay? What do you call groups of these animals? What are a group of birds called? Flock, right. Okay, a group of ants. Colony. A group of bees. Swarm. A group of cattle. A herd, right. A group of lions. A pride. A group of fish. School. Okay, these are the hard ones. A group of buzzards. A committee. I like that one. Next time you're asked to be on a committee, it's a committee of buzzards. And my other favorite is this one. A group of rhinos is called a crash. A crash of, can you imagine? And here's the interesting thing about rhinos. They can run 48 kilometers per hour. That's fast. That's faster than me on my electric bike. I hope I don't meet up with a rhino on my way into work someday, because he can outrun me. And here's the other thing about a rhino. He has very bad eyesight. Rhinos can only see 30 feet in front of them. So imagine running at 48 kilometers per hour and not being able to see very far in front of you. God, in his foresight, gave them a horn out front to make sure everything gets out of their way when they're running so that they don't crash as much. Well, as I was thinking about that rhino and that picture, I was realizing that sometimes we don't always know what's out in front of us. We don't know what the future holds. In fact, God has designed a world of uncertainty with all kinds of variables that work in. It's just part of physics. It's the way things work. And sometimes we don't know what's out front. Some more daring people will run full blast even when they can't see it. Some more cautious will take their time. But I think God would want us to take the risk at times, even when not everything's clear. He wants us to love the adventure of it, not always playing it safe, and recognizing that when even part of following Jesus means there's a degree of certainty. And in the midst of those certainties, we hold on to those two gifts, faith, and we hold on to peace that he gives us in uncertain times. As I as we conclude this morning, I'd like to turn your attention to what Jesus did at the cross as we take communion together. I want to remind you that Jesus did a very unusual thing that surprised a lot of people. When the God of the universe came in and died on a cross, that blew a lot of people's circuit breakers because they couldn't imagine why a God would do that. But God is not predictable. But God is love. And so He sent His Son into the world to die for us at the cross. And He asks us to remember that in the midst of whatever we may be facing and what we're going through, that He will be there for us because He loved us and He showed us at the cross how much He loved us. So if you'd take that bread together with me now and remember His body broken, shed for you at the cross. And then the cup. Let me just pray as we get ready to take the cup. Dear Jesus, thank you for shedding your blood. We thank you for giving your all for us. We thank you that you took the ultimate risk. You gave your life. And by faith, we believe, even though we weren't there, we believe what you did for us on the cross was because you loved us and cared so much for us. And so we take this and remember the forgiveness you offer. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Let's take it together.